It was a bright afternoon in Los Angeles when Dwayne Johnson arrived at the studio. He stepped out of a black sub, wearing a light gray shirt, dark jeans, and his usual confident smile. People near the entrance greeted him with waves and quick nods. Some took photos from a distance. He waved back politely, then walked inside with his team close behind. Inside the studio, everything was calm. Lights were being adjusted, microphones tested, and the crew was moving quickly but quietly. It was just another day in Hollywood, and Dwayne had done this many times before. He was there to promote his latest movie, a high-energy action film that fans were already excited about. The studio had been booked weeks in advance, and the interview was supposed to be short and smooth. The interviewer, a man named Jake, had been in the business for a long time. He knew how to keep a conversation flowing and how to make his guests feel at ease. As Dwayne walked onto the set, Jake stood up and offered a handshake. "Good to see you again, Dwayne," Jake said with a warm smile. "Good to be here," Dwayne replied, sitting down in the tall chair across from him. The lights brightened, the cameras rolled, and a quiet signal was given. The interview had begun. The first few questions were simple. Jake asked about the film, the intense training, and a few funny moments on set. Dwayne laughed easily, telling stories about long days of filming, unexpected weather changes, and how one of his co-stars had trouble with a stunt that involved jumping over a moving car. The crew chuckled quietly behind the cameras. Dwayne's stories were always entertaining, and he had a way of making people feel like they were right there with him. For a while, everything went perfectly. Jake nodded along, throwing in short questions that helped the conversation flow. It felt more like two friends talking than a formal interview. Dwayne leaned forward a bit when he spoke, his hands moving as he described the scenes and the effort behind them. But there was something in the air. Not everyone noticed it, but Dwayne's assistant, sitting off to the side, seemed to be watching carefully. She looked at Jake, then back at Dwayne. Her expression was calm, but focused. Dwayne himself didn't seem tense at all. He had done dozens of interviews just like this. He answered questions with ease and laughed at the right moments. Everything was going well. No one had any reason to believe that this interview would be different from the others. But sometimes even the calmest situations can shift in an instant. And that moment was just around the corner. Behind the calm and friendly atmosphere, there was a sense of something brewing, something the public couldn't see. While the cameras rolled, Dwayne Johnson seemed his usual self, confident, approachable, and always ready with a smile. But the moment the cameras were turned off, the energy in the room began to change. Dwayne's assistant Maria glanced at the time on her watch and then looked at the clock on the wall. She knew that there was a delicate balance at play. This wasn't just another movie promotion for Dwayne. It was an opportunity for him to remind everyone of his versatility. But there was also the pressure of maintaining a certain image. He had built his career on being professional and likable, but there were some subjects that had become a bit too complicated for him to address comfortably. One of those subjects was Vin Diesel. For months, rumors about tension between Dwayne and Vin had made headlines. The two men, once close co-stars and friends in the Fast and Furious franchise, had experienced a falling out that was hard to ignore. The public didn't know all the details, but the little pieces that were shared sparked endless debates online. Some fans took sides, some expressed disappointment, and others simply wondered what had happened behind the scenes. Dwayne had kept quiet about the issue, and Vin had done the same. Both had tried to move forward professionally, despite the unspoken tension. Still, every time Dwayne was asked about Vin, it became harder for him to avoid the subject. The tension was always there, hovering just below the surface. As the interview continued, Dwayne noticed Jake, the interviewer, occasionally glancing at a notebook. Dwayne could tell that Jake was getting ready to ask a more personal question, a question that had been on everyone's mind for months. And even though the interviewer was being polite, Dwayne could sense the shift. It was a change in the air, a shift that only someone like Dwayne, with years of experience in the spotlight, could pick up on. In the corner of the room, Maria's fingers tapped nervously on her phone. She had been briefed earlier to let Dwayne handle the interview however he wanted, but she could tell that Jake was pushing the limits. She knew that, sooner or later, Dwayne would be asked about Vin. It was just a matter of when. The crew members, who were usually focused on their own tasks, suddenly seemed more aware of the situation. They moved more quietly, making sure the set was well lit and everything was in place. Their eyes shifted between Dwayne and Jake, sensing the quiet tension rising. Dwayne remained calm, but he knew he couldn't control what was coming next. The interview had been smooth, but the real challenge was still ahead. Soon, The moment would come when the question would be asked, and Dwayne's reaction would determine whether this interview would be remembered as just another casual conversation or something far more dramatic. The clock ticked down. Maria checked her watch again. She was ready, but she knew Dwayne would have to handle things his way. And in the world of Hollywood, that could mean anything. As the interview continued, the atmosphere in the room remained light. Dwayne Johnson was telling another story about his time on set, his voice strong and clear, as he described an epic scene from his latest film. The room was filled with quiet laughter and the soft hum of the cameras. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, but the tension that Maria had felt earlier still lingered. Then, without warning, Jake shifted in his chair. He smiled, but there was something different in his expression, something that suggested he was preparing to ask a question that would change the mood completely. Dwayne noticed it instantly. It wasn't just the way Jake looked at him. It was the way the room seemed to grow still. The camera lights flickered slightly, but no one moved. Maria's fingers gripped her phone tighter, her eyes fixed on the interview. Jake cleared his throat and glanced at his notes before looking up at Dwayne. "So, Dwayne," Jake began, his voice casual, "you and Vin Diesel have worked together for years, but there's been a lot of talk recently about some tension between you two. Can you tell us where things stand now?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Everyone in the room felt the shift. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the crew members, usually busy with their tasks, stood frozen. Jake had done it. He had asked the one question everyone knew was coming, but had hoped would never be asked. Dwayne's expression didn't change immediately. He sat there, his face calm, but his eyes narrowed slightly. The smile that had been on his face a moment ago was gone. He took a deep breath, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of his chair. Maria shifted in her seat. She had been waiting for this. She had known it was coming, but even she couldn't predict how Dwayne would react. There was no way to know how someone like him, who was usually so in control of his emotions, would respond to a question like that. For a second, Dwayne didn't speak. He just looked at Jake, his eyes steady. The silence stretched on, and everyone waited. Then finally Dwayne spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I don't think it's fair to talk about that here," he said, his tone measured. "I'm here to promote the movie, and that's what I'd like to focus on. I think it's important to keep things professional." It was clear that Dwayne had made a choice. He wasn't going to let the conversation veer off into something personal. He wasn't going to give in to the pressure of discussing his past with Vin Diesel, not here, not now. It was a careful, controlled response, one that told everyone in the room that he was not willing to go down that path. The room fell silent once again. Jake seemed to hesitate, unsure of how to proceed. He had asked the question, but now he realized that he had crossed a line. "Understood," Jake finally said, nodding. "Let's get back to the movie." But the damage had already been done. The quiet tension in the air was impossible to ignore. Even though the conversation shifted back to lighter topics, everyone could feel the weight of what had just happened. Dwayne had made it clear that some things were off limits. And yet, despite his calm response, everyone knew this interview wasn't going to be forgotten anytime soon. The moment Dwayne Johnson spoke those words, the room seemed to freeze. The silence was thick, almost as if the air itself had become heavy. Maria, who had been watching closely, could see the shift in Dwayne's posture. He was still calm, but there was a firmness in his body language that told her this was the moment he had been preparing for. The interviewer, Jake, tried to recover quickly, offering a quick nod and then glancing down at his notes. He shifted his position in the chair, trying to steer the conversation back to safer territory. But it was clear that the energy in the room had changed. Even though Jake had moved on, there was a sense of unease that lingered. Dwayne, on the other hand, didn't seem to relax. He didn't give any sign of frustration or anger. His face remained neutral, but his eyes were focused, and it was clear that his mind was already elsewhere. He glanced at Maria, who was sitting quietly off to the side. She knew him well enough to read his expression. He had made a decision, and that decision was about to become clear to everyone. Without saying another word, Dwayne stood up slowly from his chair. He didn't make a scene. There were no harsh words or loud outbursts. He simply stood, straightened his shirt, and gave a small nod toward Jake. "I think we're done here," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. There was no anger in his tone, but there was a finality to it that made everyone in the room understand the conversation was over. The crew members looked at each other, unsure of what to do. Jake stared at Dwayne for a moment, clearly taken aback. He hadn't expected the interview to end like this, especially not after a simple question about Vin Diesel. But Dwayne didn't wait for any response. He just turned and began walking toward the exit. Maria stood up quickly, moving to follow him, but not in a hurry. She was used to moments like this with Dwayne, times when he knew exactly what was right for him and wasn't afraid to act on it. She gave a brief, apologetic look to Jake, who still sat in his chair, his face a mix of surprise and confusion. Dwayne walked out of the room, his steps steady and purposeful. It wasn't an emotional reaction. It wasn't a tantrum. It was simply a decision. He had set a boundary, and that boundary had been crossed. Now he was taking control of the situation in the only way he knew how, by walking away. As Dwayne stepped into the hallway, Maria followed closely behind. She could feel the tension slowly leaving her own shoulders. She had seen him walk away from interviews before, but never quite like this. The difference now was that the world would be watching. It wasn't just a private decision anymore. It was a statement. Back inside the studio, the interview was over. Jake sat still for a long moment, his hands resting on his lap, unsure of what to do next. The crew began to pack up, quietly and without much conversation. Everyone knew that what had just happened would be talked about for days to come. And they were right. The news spread fast. Dwayne Johnson had walked out of an interview, and the world was eager to know why. As soon as Dwayne Johnson walked out of the interview, the ripple effect was instant. Within minutes, the video clip of him standing up and leaving the set began to spread across social media. Fans, reporters, and curious onlookers watched as the scene unfolded, each person adding their own thoughts to the story. The internet was buzzing with speculation about what had really happened behind closed doors. Some fans stood by Dwayne, praising him for setting boundaries and refusing to engage in unnecessary drama. He doesn't owe anyone an explanation. One fan wrote on Twitter, "Good for him for knowing when to walk away." Others admired how calm and collected he was, even in the face of a tough question. "That's true professionalism," another user commented. But not everyone saw it that way. Some fans were confused and disappointed, wondering what had really caused the tension between Dwayne and Vin Diesel. "What's going on with those two?" a few people asked. "They were family on screen. Did something happen off camera?" The questions kept coming. The situation had become a mystery for many, and they were eager for answers. The media jumped in, too. TV shows, news outlets, and online blogs began reporting on the walkout. Some tried to make sense of it, speculating that Dwayne was still upset over past conflicts with Vin, while others focused on the question itself. Dwayne walks off after being asked about Vin Diesel, the headlines read. The real reason for the walkout. Meanwhile, Dwayne was quiet. He didn't immediately address the situation publicly, choosing instead to focus on his work and his upcoming projects. It wasn't the first time he had dealt with a tough situation in the public eye, but this one felt different. The way he had walked out of the interview left people talking, and now everyone was watching to see how he would respond. But Dwayne didn't rush to explain himself. He knew that sometimes letting the dust settle was the best approach. His team, including Maria, were already working to handle the media attention. They knew that the more he said, the more questions would follow. And in the end, they didn't want to turn a small moment into a bigger issue. Soon enough, the story found its way to Vin Diesel. He didn't comment directly on Dwayne's walkout, but he posted something on social media that caught people's attention. It was a photo of him and Dwayne from an earlier time, back when they were filming the Fast and Furious movies. In the caption, Vin wrote about family and brotherhood. It wasn't a direct response, but it seemed to suggest that there was still some bond between them, despite everything. The message was vague, and fans were left to interpret it as they saw fit. Some hoped it was a sign of peace between the two stars, while others wondered if there was still a deeper issue at play. The world seemed to be waiting for the next move, but Dwayne remained silent for now. Back at the studio, Jake, the interviewer, reflected on what had happened. He didn't expect the situation to escalate the way it did. He had only asked one question, but that simple question had set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest words could create the biggest impact. The public didn't need much of an excuse to dive deeper into the situation between Dwayne Johnson and Vin Diesel. The two had worked together for years, building the Fast and Furious franchise into one of the biggest film series of all time. Their on-screen chemistry had made them fan favorites, and many people saw them as close friends off camera as well. But in recent years, rumors about a falling out between the two had surfaced, and with Dwayne's unexpected walkout, the mystery surrounding their relationship grew even more intense. The conflict, while not fully known to the public, had been hinted at during the filming of The Fate of the Furious, Reports began to circulate that Dwayne and Vin had clashed over everything from the way the film was being made to disagreements about leadership on set. Dwayne had famously posted a message on social media about some unprofessional co-stars, and it didn't take long for fans to guess that he was referring to Vin. In an interview, Dwayne had been asked about this post. He had replied carefully, choosing his words with precision. "I just believe in professionalism," he said, his tone calm but firm. "On set, it's important that everyone is doing their best. It's about the work, not about personal things." But that didn't stop the rumors. Fans were eager to know what was really going on behind the scenes. Why had Dwayne suddenly become so open about his frustrations? Why was Vin silent about the matter? Vin, for his part, had stayed quiet for a long time. He hadn't addressed the rumors head-on, even though fans were eager to hear his side of the story. Instead, he kept posting motivational messages on social media, reminding his followers about the importance of family and brotherhood. These posts often seemed to allude to his relationship with Dwayne, but he never directly mentioned the tension. However, after the interview where Dwayne had walked out, Vin's message seemed to take on a new meaning. The photo he posted of the two of them together, with the words about family, made fans think that perhaps Vin was trying to mend things. Some saw it as a way of saying that despite their differences, the bond they had created on set was still strong. Others, however, wondered if it was just a cryptic way of making a point without fully addressing the issue. The tension between the two men wasn't just about one disagreement. It had built up over time, and while Dwayne had moved on, it seemed that Vin was still holding on to the past in some way. The question everyone had now was, would they ever be able to resolve their differences? And if they did, would it happen publicly, or would they continue to keep their personal issues private? As the days passed, the speculation continued to grow. Fans couldn't stop talking about what had happened and why it had happened. And for Dwayne and Vin, the public's curiosity was only making it harder to avoid the topic. The world was watching, waiting for any clue, any sign that the two men would address the situation head-on. Days passed after Dwayne Johnson's unexpected walkout, and the media frenzy around his exit from the interview continued to swirl. Each new headline seemed to fuel more questions, more curiosity, and more theories. Everyone wanted to know what had really happened between him and Vin Diesel. Some wondered if Dwayne was just setting a boundary, while others believed there was something deeper at play. Behind the scenes, Dwayne and his team had been handling things as quietly as possible. Maria, his assistant, had been fielding calls from the press and making sure that Dwayne stayed focused on his work. Although the situation was complicated, they knew that the more attention it got, the harder it would be to avoid. Dwayne had always been careful with his words, and now it was more important than ever to maintain that level of control. Meanwhile, Vin Diesel continued with his own work, but he couldn't avoid the growing pressure either. Fans and reporters alike were eager for a response, but Vin's silence was becoming harder to maintain. He was used to being the strong, silent type, but even he knew that eventually he would have to say something. The day finally came when Vin made his decision. After several weeks of speculation and silence, he sat down for an interview of his own. It was a calm, early morning when the interview began. Vin entered the studio with a quiet but confident demeanor, his face serious but not angry. He greeted the interviewer and settled into his seat. The room was quieter than usual, as if everyone knew something important was about to happen. The interviewer, a familiar face in the world of entertainment, asked Vin about his work, his projects, and of course his relationship with Dwayne. The question was expected, but the moment it was asked, the air in the room shifted. Everyone, including Vin, knew this was the turning point. He could no longer avoid talking about it. Vin took a deep breath before responding. He had thought long and hard about what to say. "Listen," he started, his voice calm but firm. "Dwayne and I have had our differences, sure, but we've also shared a lot of great moments together. We've both been part of something bigger than ourselves. The Fast and Furious family is more than just a movie. It's a legacy. It's about respect, and it's about loyalty." The interviewer nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I've always respected Dwayne," Vin said. "We may not always see eye to eye, but that doesn't change the respect I have for him as a person and as a performer. Sometimes things get complicated in this business, but at the end of the day, we've both worked hard, and we've both given a lot to this franchise. We're professionals." There was a pause, and for a moment, it felt like the weight of the situation hung in the air. Vin wasn't apologizing, but he was acknowledging the tension. He was taking the first step toward healing the situation, at least publicly. "We're still family," Vin added, his voice softer now. "And I believe that no matter what." The interviewer sat back, clearly satisfied with the response. The room was filled with a quiet hum of the cameras, and it felt as though a small weight had been lifted. Vin had said his piece, and now the ball was in Dwayne's court. As the interview ended, Vin stood up, his expression steady. The interview had gone smoothly, but the real challenge was how the world would react. Would Dwayne respond? Would they ever find a way to repair their fractured relationship? Only time would tell. Weeks passed after Vin Diesel's interview, and the tension between him and Dwayne Johnson seemed to calm, though it never fully disappeared. The media buzz faded a little, but there was still a sense of anticipation in the air. Fans were waiting, some hoping for a clear resolution, others uncertain of whether Dwayne and Vin would ever truly make amends. Dwayne had remained quiet following Vin's comments. He had his reasons, and he knew the importance of patience in situations like this. He wasn't ready to jump into another interview or make any public statements just yet. For Dwayne, action spoke louder than words. He focused on his work, his films, and his charity efforts. But the question lingered in the back of everyone's minds. Would he and Vin ever find a way to move forward? It was a Sunday afternoon when Dwayne made a surprising move. He posted a photo on his social media accounts. The picture was simple. It was a behind-the-scenes shot of him and Vin from the set of their first Fast and Furious film together. They were standing side by side, smiling, arms around each other as they looked at the camera. The caption read, "Family is everything. No matter the ups and downs, we always have each other's backs." The post wasn't long, but it was clear. Dwayne wasn't saying much, but he was saying enough. For those who had followed the saga from the beginning, the message was loud and clear. He wasn't closing the door on his relationship with Vin. There was no public explanation or apology, but Dwayne was willing to acknowledge the history they shared, both on and off the screen. The response to the post was overwhelming. Fans flooded the comment section with messages of hope, some sharing their excitement that the two might reconcile. "This is what we've been waiting for." One fan commented, "Family is the most important thing. We're behind you both." Others expressed their appreciation for Dwayne's maturity in handling the situation. "Respect to you, Dwayne. Handling this like a pro," wrote another. Vin saw the post. He didn't comment right away, but it wasn't long before he shared a post of his own. His picture was similar. An older behind-the-scenes photo of them laughing together on set. In his caption, he wrote, "We may not always agree, but we will always respect each other." The journey continues. The media picked up on this too. The idea that the two stars, who had been at the center of such a storm, were now showing signs of reconciliation spread quickly. While it didn't mean everything was instantly fixed, it was a start. People could see that both men had decided to let go of the past, at least in the public eye, and focus on the future. There were no dramatic interviews, no grand apologies. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was real. And sometimes that's all that matters. Dwayne and Vin had both shown that despite the challenges, the bond they shared as colleagues and as people could withstand the pressure. As time went on, the Fast and Furious family continued to grow, and so did the friendship between Dwayne and Vin, albeit quietly. They never made a big deal out of it, but everyone knew the story had a happy ending. There was always more work to do, more movies to make, and of course, more family to build. The world moved on, but one thing was certain: Dwayne and Vin had faced the storm together and emerged stronger for it.